Every morning, before dawn, when the world was still wrapped in silence and the first light barely touched the horizon, an elderly woman named Rosalind would make her way to the small hill behind her cottage, carrying with her a peculiar set of knitting needles that seemed to be carved from crystallized moonlight. There, as the morning mist began to rise from the valley below, she would perform the most extraordinary craft anyone had ever witnessed. She would knit stories directly from the dancing vapors, creating tangible narratives that could change the lives of anyone who touched them. Rosalind had discovered her unusual gift quite by accident. 60 years earlier, during a particularly difficult period in her life, when words had failed her completely, she had been trying to knit a simple scarf to comfort herself after her husband's death, but her grief was so overwhelming that her hands wouldn't cooperate with ordinary yarn. In frustration, she had gone outside at dawn and, seeing the morning mist swirling around her cottage, had impulsively tried to catch the vapors with her knitting needles. To her amazement, the mist had responded to her touch, threading itself onto her needles like the most delicate silk. As she worked, something magical happened. The grief she had been unable to express in words began to flow through her fingers into the misty threads. The mist seemed to absorb not just her emotions, but the entire story of her love for her husband, their years together, and the bittersweet beauty of their shared memories. The finished piece was unlike anything that had ever existed. A gossamer shawl that shimmered with captured morning light and seemed to tell the complete story of a marriage through its intricate patterns. When Rosalind wore it, she felt not the crushing weight of loss, but the gentle warmth of love that transcended death. More importantly, anyone who saw the shawl could somehow sense the beautiful love story woven into its misty threads, leaving them with renewed faith in the power of human connection. Word of Rosalind's extraordinary knitting spread gradually through whispered conversations and careful recommendations. People who desperately needed stories in their lives, stories of hope, healing, love, or courage, would find their way to her cottage just as dawn was breaking. They would arrive carrying their own pain or uncertainty, and Rosalind would listen carefully to what they needed before turning to the morning mist with her magical needles. The mist itself seemed to cooperate with her intentions, swirling into different patterns depending on what type of story was needed. For someone seeking courage, the mist would dance upward in bold spirals that Rosalind could knit into a scarf that told the story of heroes who had faced their fears and emerged stronger. For a person needing comfort, the mist would flow gently in soothing waves that became blankets telling stories of kindness, compassion, and the healing power of time. Each morning brought different qualities of mist that were suited to different types of story. The soft, silver mist that rose on calm mornings was perfect for love stories. Rosalind could knit scarves that told tales of couples who had found each other against impossible odds, or shawls that celebrated the quiet, enduring love between friends and family members. The golden mist that appeared when sunrise broke through clouds was ideal for stories of transformation and new beginnings. Rosalind learned that the stories she knitted were not generic tales, but were specifically tailored to the needs of the person who would receive them. A teenage girl struggling with self-confidence would receive a hat that told the story of a young woman who discovered her unique talents and learned to value her own worth. A businessman facing ethical dilemmas at work would find himself wearing a vest that narrated the journey of someone who chose integrity over profit and found unexpected rewards. The most challenging requests came from people who had lost the ability to believe in stories at all, those who had become so cynical or hurt that they couldn't imagine narratives of hope or healing. For these individuals, Rosalind would work with the thinnest, most delicate morning mist, creating almost transparent pieces that told tiny, quiet stories. A handkerchief that whispered about small acts of kindness, or gossamer gloves that spoke of brief moments of unexpected beauty. Children were Rosalind's favorite clients because they could see the stories in her knitted pieces more clearly than adults. A child wearing one of her story scarves would often begin acting out the narrative, becoming the brave protagonist or kind helper that the mist had woven into the pattern. Parents would watch in amazement as shy children became confident after wearing capes that told stories of young heroes, or as anxious children found peace in mittens that narrated tales of friendship and belonging. The stories in Rosalind's knitting were not just comforting fiction, they seemed to have the power to influence reality. People who wore her story-infused garments would often find themselves living out similar narratives in their own lives. A woman wearing a shawl that told the story of someone who found love later in life would unexpectedly meet her perfect partner. A man with a scarf that narrated a tale of career transformation would discover new opportunities that aligned perfectly with his hidden talent. Rosalind discovered that the morning mist contained fragments of all the stories that had ever been told or lived in the surrounding area. When she knitted with focused intention, she could draw out specific narrative threads, tales of triumph that had unfolded in the valley below, love stories that had bloomed in the nearby village, adventures that had begun on the winding country road. The mist was like a library of local legends and personal histories, all available to be woven into new garments. The most profound pieces Rosalind created were what she called healing stories. Garments knitted from mist that appeared only after great community tragedies or during times of collective grief. These special mists seemed to contain the stories of resilience and recovery that communities needed to hear. After a factory closure left many unemployed, Rosalind knitted blankets from golden morning mist that told stories of towns that had reinvented themselves and thrived again. Some of Rosalind's most beautiful work was done in collaboration with the season. Spring mist was perfect for knitting stories of growth and renewal, baby blankets that told tales of new life and infinite possibility, or garden gloves that narrated stories of seeds that grew into magnificent gardens despite challenging conditions. Autumn mist carried stories of wisdom gained through experience, which Rosalind would knit into warm sweaters for elderly people facing the transitions of aging. The old woman's craft attracted the attention of storytellers, writers, and artists who came to study her technique and learn about the relationship between mist, narrative, and creation. But Rosalind's gift couldn't be taught in any conventional way. It required a particular sensitivity to the stories that floated unseen in the morning air, and the ability to translate emotional truth into physical form through the ancient craft of knit. Rosalind's most meaningful work involved what she called completion stories. Garments knitted for people whose own life narratives felt unfinished or unfulfilled. A woman who had never had children but had always wanted them received a shawl that told the story of all the young people she had mentored and influenced, showing her that her mothering had taken many forms. A man who felt his career had been a failure received a vest that narrated the story of all the small ways his work had made a difference, revealing the true impact of his contribution. As Rosalind grew older, she began to worry about what would happen to her gift when she could no longer rise at dawn to meet the morning mist. But she discovered something wonderful. Several of the people who had received her story knitting had begun to develop their own sensitivity to the narrative possibilities contained in natural phenomena. A young woman who had worn one of Rosalind's courage scarves began to see stories in the patterns of falling leaves, while a man with a healing blanket started to hear tales of hope in the sound of rain. The morning mist seemed to respond to this expanding circle of story-sensitive people appearing more frequently and in richer variety, as if it was pleased to have more collaborators in the work of weaving comfort and hope into the world. Rosalind realized that her true gift was not just the ability to knit stories from mist, but the power to awaken others to the stories that surrounded them constantly, waiting to be recognized and shared. On her final morning of mist knitting, Rosalind created her masterpiece, a gossamer cape that told the story of storytelling itself, woven from the most delicate silver mist that seemed to contain fragments of every tale that had ever been told. The cape was so light, it seemed to be made of solidified whispers, yet it carried within its threads the entire history of human narrative, from the first stories told around prehistoric fires to the modern tales that were still being created every day. Rosalind left the cape in her cottage, with instructions that it should be worn by anyone who needed to remember that they were not just living a life, but telling a story, a unique narrative that had never been told before and would never be told again. The cape would remind its wearers that every day was a new page, every decision a plot development, every relationship a character connection, and every challenge an opportunity for the kind of growth that makes stories worth telling. The cottage and the hill, where Rosalind had knitted her misty stories, became a pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand their own life narratives.
Visitors would arrive at dawn to watch the morning mist and try to see the stories dancing within its swirling pattern, learning to recognize that the world was full of tales waiting to be discovered, woven together, and shared with anyone who needed to remember that life itself is the greatest story ever being written.